The Gardener Ben here, and you join me live from the potting bench here in the vegetable and cutting garden. It is that time of year. We are now marching our way into spring. March has arrived. It is gloriously sunny here on the south coast of the UK, and it is now time to start thinking about waking up our dahlia tubers. Now, if you have overwintered your dahlia tubers, you should be starting to think about waking them up anywhere now over the next week or two now. I'm having loads and loads of messages that flood to me across my social media channels, whether it's here on YouTube, Instagram, or TikTok, of people that unfortunately have failed to keep their dahlia tubers alive over the winter. Now, you know me, I like to keep my processes really, really basic, and I like to tell you exactly why I do that. A dahlia tuber has no more chance of survival than it does actually in the ground, wrapped up in the soil. If you don't plan to actually sell your dahlia tubers and divide them and sell them to other people over the winter and early spring, there is absolutely no reason whatsoever why you should dig up your dahlia tubers. So I just let that one pass. It's a warm, sunny day, so all the boys are out with their toys, unfortunately. Uh, that if you are not selling your dahlia tubers, there's absolutely no reason why you'd want to dig them up in the autumn and actually put them anywhere. They're safer off in the soil. Simply mulch over them, allow the frost to take the top growth, allow the tuber to send all the starches and sugars in the stems down to the soil. You don't need to be out rushing about. If as soon as the stems are blacked off, you've got plenty of time. You don't need to panic. I know it looks very, very scary, but unless we get a frost of sort of -12, -15, your tuber is not going to freeze in the ground. It's not going to see any damage. So you could got a couple of weeks after the dahlias have actually been frosted off to actually lift them up or mulch them over, which is what I prefer to do. Over the next couple of weeks, you're going to see me lifting some dahlia tubers that I've actually stored in the ground over the winter months. I'm going to be dividing those with you, and I'm going to show you how those are done. And I'm also going to be potting up the new dahlias that I've purchased for this year from my favourite supplier. Incidentally, if you haven't listened to yet, do catch all episodes of the Gardener Ben podcast. It's streaming now on Apple, Amazon, and Spotify. There's loads of information about dahlias there. And in a couple of weeks' time, you're going to hear me talking to Nick, who owns my favourite dahlia nursery down at Romsey. Not far from here, home on the south coast of England. And he is going to be talking me through everything dahlias. And he likes to keep his process really, really basic as well. Right, so if you're lifting dahlia tubers out of storage and you've suffered one of the three problems, let me talk you through the pitfalls you may have experienced by storing dahlias and washing them off too much. Your dahlia tubers may have rotted, which means they have been far too wet when you've put them away, or you've kept them somewhere too cold and too wet, and they've actually rotted over the winter. If this has happened, unfortunately, there is nothing that can be done for you whatsoever. You're going to have to get yourself online or down to your local garden centre or DIY store, and you're going to have to purchase yourself some new ones for this season, unfortunately. If your dahlia tubers have been eaten by rodents or rats, please don't be disheartened. They are packed full of starches and sugars, and unfortunately make a very good, tasty treat for overwintering rodents. The damage is not often as bad as you think it is. As long as the actual wounds are dry and you've allowed them to form a callus, if the wounds are wet and it's recent, don't plant them just yet. Allow them to sit out onto a bench or maybe a work surface just for a couple of days so they form a callus, much like you would do if you were planting a succulent. Allow that to dry up and actually form a callus before you plant them, and you can move on to that stage in a couple of days' time. If your dahlia tubers are now all shriveled up and they're too soft and they're all lost a huge amount of moisture, you've obviously kept them somewhere too warm. They're probably waking up now and they're a bit shriveled, looking like potatoes that have maybe been stored for far too long. What you can do with them is you can now place them into lukewarm water, something around air temperature in the house, so something around 14, 15, 16 degrees, and you can pop them into a warm bowl of water for around 6 or 12 hours. That will allow the tuber to plump up ever so slightly and take on a little bit of water before moving on to the next stage, which I'm just going to talk you through. Now, if you have an outdoor growing space like me, an unheated greenhouse, which is just off to my left, you can go ahead and start thinking about potting up your dahlia tubers anyone over the next couple of weeks. However, if you don't have access to an outdoor growing space and you're going to be bringing these inside the house, I would advise you hold back for about another 3, 4, or maybe 5 weeks just yet. We want to be timing the growth of our plants to coincide with the date of the last frost. Here in the UK, our last frost is going to be something around the third week of May, normally somewhere around my birthday. About the 20th of May is about the last frost we experience. And after that, most of my plants are hardened off, and I'm starting to think about putting them out and actually plant them by the beginning of June. So if you are growing in the house and you don't have access to an outdoor unheated greenhouse, please don't be planting your dahlia tubers just yet. You'll end up with really, really large, huge, leggy plants producing masses of growth, which you are really going to struggle to keep. They're going to get far, far too big, and they're going to think it's more like June or July when it's really only April. So hold back just for a couple of weeks just for now, and look out for the video that I'll post here to YouTube to talk you through the process. In the next couple of weeks, you're also going to see me lifting and deveiling divided tubers. You're also going to see me taking softwood cuttings from the dahlias I'm just about to pot up. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through my process. You're going to need some compost. I'm going to talk you through the compost mix I've got here. This is some peat-free compost, some normal multi-purpose. Now, I'm going to talk you very briefly about the mix I've got in front of me. Unfortunately, we are unable to use peat anymore, and it's a bit of a bittersweet thing for a horticulturist not to be able to use peat. As far as the environment is concerned, it is by far the best thing. Peat is a very, very old natural product. It's been locked up in peat bogs for millions and millions of years. We've released huge quantities of carbon back into our atmosphere by unfortunately digging up peat. It's really, really bad for the environment. And unfortunately, there's no nutritional value in peat either. It's millions and millions of years old. And unfortunately, you would have to add all of the nutritional value that a plant needs into it by adding chemicals, which again is a huge amount of carbon footprint. The problem with peat is it unfortunately did hold water beautifully, and it was really, really good for growing things, and it was very stable because it's millions of years old. So we've had to replace it with fully organically derived compost, things that are made from recycled green garden waste and things like bracken. Unfortunately, they don't hold water very, very well. So become a bit unpredictable. You can often look at a plant and think, oh my goodness, it's bone dry. There's a crust on the top that's actually really, really dry. And you stick your finger in, it's all dry and crunchy. Deep down in the pot, it's unfortunately sopping wet because it doesn't hold the moisture particularly well. So what I've done with the compost here, I've got some John Innings number 3 here, which is a loam-based garden compost. All I'm going to do to my peat-free compost is I'm going to add a little bit of John Innings into it. This is basically garden soil, which is then screened, added a little bit of organic matter to it, but it's going to actually stabilize the water holding capabilities of the compost. And all I'm going to do is turn that through into my potting mix. It's like making a crumble topping, really. I just want to break it up. So I've got an even distribution of organic peat-free compost and then John Innings number 3, which is going to give it a little bit more weight and hold just a little more moisture. Right, now we've done our seed mix, our potting mix, let's move on to actually potting up some dahlias. I like to do this in a very, very certain way. I'm going to post a video. I'll do this in the same way every single year, but I'm going to talk you through it. You're going to need a normal sized pot. Now, I normally suggest to people that they deal with the size of the pot. You need to match your dahlia tuber up with the size pot you're putting it into. If you can get away with putting it in a smaller pot, putting in a smaller pot. But I normally determine the size of the pots that I use by the size of my hands. This is about a 3 litre. I think it's, yeah, this is a 3 litre pot, something in the region of about 7, 8 inches in diameter. I've got really quite big hands. A reason why I suggest people use their hand as a guide is you won't be able to get hold of the stem of a dahlia when you come to actually repot it. They're really, really fleshy and they're very, very soft. It's not until later on in the season they produce a fairly woody stem. So make sure that when you're potting up a dahlia tuber, you put it into a pot that your hand fits over the top of. So when you come to turn the dahlia out, you have full control over the root system and the actual pot that will come away. What you don't want to do is to take the pot off if the pot is too large and it to crumble away away from the tuber. All of the roots are tiny, they're hair-like. And if you remove those, unfortunately, the hair-like roots at that stage, normally in late May to beginning of June, the plant is going to go into stress and unfortunately is very, very likely to kill it. So you do need to proceed with caution. So make sure when you're choosing your pot that you choose a pot that you can handle. So put your hand over the top. When you turn it out, you've got full control over the actual root ball itself. Right. What I also like to do at this stage is add a little bit of horticultural grit. Let's move this out the way and turn this down so you can see what I'm doing. I'm just going to simply add around a half an inch, about a centimetre of horticultural grit to the bottom of my pot. And I like to do that for a really, really good reason. Dahlia tubers are now at their absolute weakest. These are obviously overwintered by Gilberts and supplied to me. This particular tuber now needs to grow. It doesn't want to be in storage anymore. It wants to grow. It wants to wake up. And unfortunately, when it starts to produce soft, lovely green growth, it's going to be as vulnerable as it's ever been. The slugs and snails can smell these from literally hundreds and hundreds of meters away and will gravitate towards these as soon as they smell them. Little tiny slugs and snails overwinter in the bottom of your pots, in the bottom of your cold frames, in the bottom of your seed trays, and they get taken into the greenhouse because people don't think they're there, and they are. They're only tiny. They're half an inch or a centimetre long, but they can do catastrophic damage. They like to come up through the drainage holes. So I like to put a little bit of horticultural grit, sharp sand, or crushed eggshell into the bottom of the pot. It adds a little bit of a barrier method to the very bottom, and the slugs and snails don't tend to come up through the pots. So what I'm going to do now is just fill this pot up with a bit of multi-purpose compost. You want to be planting this particular tuber at almost ground level. You don't want to be burying it too high. What you want to be doing is seeing the neck of the tuber very, very close to the top of the pot. Don't want to bury it too deeply, and we don't want to overwhelm it. And what we want to do then is we simply want to backfill around the tuber with our blended compost. At this stage, if you have any eyes, this particular tuber didn't have any eyes. I've got one here I put by. This one, as you can see, has eyes developing all over it. What you don't want to be doing at this stage is being too rough with it. Don't get in there and start mashing it about and being too rough with it. Loosely fill the pot because you don't want to damage those eyes. Just want to lightly finger that compost in around the tuber. What you can do as well, or what I often do, give them a good bang on the bench, knock that soil through in between those tubers, and you want to end up with your tuber virtually like that at soil level. You can see the tops of them, the necks of the tubers just there. That's where it's going to produce the eyes from. And what I want to do now is I'm going to cover this. What I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to label it. Gilbert's are really good. My local nursery are very good at providing a little label. I'm just going to tuck that into the pot so I actually know what I've got. This one is Penhill watermelon. Pop the label in. I'm then going to dress it off with about another centimetre, another 10 millimetres of horticultural grit. Once again, this tuber needs to wake up, it needs to grow. The growth that comes out of it needs to be successful, and it actually needs to get that growth and start growing away and recharging the tuber. It's now it's its weakest. There's no more food coming unless it grows. And the slugs and snails will do this terrible, terrible damage. So a little bit of horticultural grit, sharp sand, or crushed eggshell or crushed whelk shell will give you a really, really nice defense system against the slugs and snails and keep them away. The other thing I can suggest you do as well is keep them well spaced out. Don't pack them too close together when you come to put them into the greenhouse or cold frame. Leave a little bit of space around them, and then the slugs and snails can't actually transport themselves between pots even easier. The other thing to do is make sure that you go out and inspect them regularly. Make sure you pick the pots up and have a look underneath. Make sure you've got no nasties hiding in them, because again, overnight they will do catastrophic damage. This is now going to get a really, really good water. And one of the largest questions I get asked about bringing on dahlias is how often should I water them? The answer is basically as often as they need watering. This particular one is going to be watered so the water streams out the bottom of the pot. It's going to be completely watered, and it's going to go onto a heat mat in the greenhouse. Need to give this a little bit of heat now, get this growing away comfortable. If you don't have a heat mat, what you can do is you can put them onto large seed trays and cover them up with a cloche. I've got some really large cloches here that are around a metre long and about 30 or 40 centimetres wide. I can get about 6 or 7 of these large pots underneath one of them at a time. I basically want to force some heat into these over the next week or so and really get them moving. In about 14 days' time, you'll be able to see tiny little white roots coming from the very, very bottom of the pot. Then you know the tuber is awake. Wait patiently for it to actually produce some growth above ground. After about 14 to 21 days, if you haven't seen any growth from above ground, and you're not seeing any roots come out the bottom of the pot, I'll start getting a little bit twitchy, a little bit nervous. I'll start moving those ones to one side. And then after about 28 days, so normally by about the beginning of April, if I've seen no growth coming from the top, I've seen no hair-like roots coming from the bottom of the pot, I'll very, very gingerly knock the tubers out. Some take much longer to wake up than others. They're just needing a little bit more of a rest. Others, unfortunately, don't make it. They actually rot and they never come up. So, unfortunately, you do lose some. But that's my process for potting up and bringing on dahlias. Over the next couple of weeks, you're going to see me lift some dahlia tubers that I've kept in the ground over winter. I'm going to lift and divide those. I'll talk you through the process of how to do that. You're also going to see me taking dahlia cuttings and actually propagate from the tubers that I've purchased for this year, which will then produce rooted cuttings in about 6 weeks, 8 weeks time, which this year will perform little tubers to overwinter for you to be able to add to your cutting collections for next year. Right, if you have any questions, do look out for the videos from me about dahlias. Be posting this exact same tutorial to my grid, so you can actually have a look at this in normal time if you wanted to. Make sure you leave me a comment below if you have any questions, and do catch all episodes of the Gardener Ben podcast, which is streaming on Apple, Amazon, and Spotify now. And consider purchasing yourself a Gardener Ben membership subscription here on YouTube for unseen gardening content that you won't see anywhere else on the internet apart from paid subscriptions on YouTube, TikTok, and uh, Instagram. Loads and loads of information there. As a paying subscriber, you get access to a whole load of videos that I've created. You also get to request content as well. So loads for you to catch up on and binge watch. I will see you all again very soon. Thank you to everybody that's joined me. I will catch up with you a bit later. Bye bye now.